Welcome back to the APSCC 2020 live webinar series. I'm Christopher Slaughter, your host for today's session. Joining us today for the future of DTH satellite in India is Media Partners Asia, making the presentation and discussing the subject. Vivek Kuto, the Executive Director, who's joining us from Singapore, and Mihir Shah, who's in the Mumbai office, the Vice President for India. Thank you very much for joining us today. And Vivek, just take it away.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it's great to be making this presentation to you and your members on the future of direct-to-home satellites in India. Thanks for giving us this opportunity. I'm joined by Mihir Shah, as you said, the head of India. And if there's any more sort of requests from your audience for more information, please feel free to contact us. So let's talk about the future of direct-to-home satellite in India. Much has happened this year through the pandemic, obviously. And there's a lot of strategic opportunities, risks, and challenges to address for this very exciting sector. So let's move ahead with the presentation. So what is the state of the television nation? So this really looks at the state of the landscape at the end of last year before we dial back into what's happened in 2020. Now, at the end of last year, India had obviously about 300 million households. But the people who have television, the penetration of those households is the lowest in the Asia Pacific region at 57%. So the linear television market, the channel market, one would think has ample headroom for growth, and we still believe it does. However, pay TV penetration, so the penetration of the people who own TVs, the people who are paying for content at roughly $3 to $4, that pay TV penetration in India has remained fairly high at 79%, I think, last year. Approximately 135 million subscribers. Now, off that base, 78 million are on cable. There's utility analog cable, there's digital cable, and 56 million on direct-to-home satellite, digital set-top boxes through satellite. Now, the digital pay TV market is fairly mature because 90% of those 134 million subscribers that I mentioned are now digitalized. They have at least one set-top box in their home. You all probably know about conditional access systems in phases 1 and 2, and that is defined by the regulators' digitalization program, particularly in phases 1 and 2 are basically the urban centers. And that's where direct-to-home satellite has around 23 million subscribers, and cable stands at about 19 million. Now, in the rural markets, what's interesting is that digital cable has actually overtaken direct-to-home satellite in those areas, and it has 43 million subs, though in the longer run, Mihir and the team in India believe that DTH will gain share in these rural markets, which is something we might address in the Q&A. So as we turn to the next page of our presentation, this is quite an interesting view on how you look at the consumer segments of people who get video, who consume content in India, really driven by affordability and the consumption pattern. So typically what we're seeing here is that the top bracket, or the top 5 million households, would roughly pay $10 to $15, a little bit more on content or any new products launched. The next 25 million homes would pay anywhere between $5 to $10. And these are also households which have upgraded to HD or any local SVOD services. Then you have a huge chunk of around 150 million households which pay about $3 to $5 for pay TV. And most of them also consume AVOD platforms like YouTube. Then you have obviously 50 million television households in the rural markets, which are very important, which consume things like free dish, which is of course a DTH service, and telco aggregator services like GeoTV. And then you have the bottom 100 million households who don't own a TV, and then might sample a bit of television viewing on free dish, and will eventually upgrade to pay TV. Now, what's interesting is YouTube, and of course, in the past 15 to 18 months, we've seen a lot of short video vertical apps that have gained popularity in this section amongst Indians' rural youth, a fairly important segment. Now, that's all positive. Negative to some extent particularly on the channel ecosystem, has been this new tariff order. And my colleague Mihir might give a little bit more context to this. That got implemented early last year. It changed the consumer packaging from a traditional base, sort of mid and premium bundles, the classic structure. You have basic pack, mid pack, expanded basic pack, premium tier, to a lot more choices, particularly a la carte, skinny bundles for consumers. And so now a typical consumer bill is somewhat complicated in India. It's sort of split into a fixed access fee, which goes to distribution platforms, right? Like cable and DTH, and then content fees, the majority of which goes to the broadcasters. And despite many intentions, consumer ARPUs have actually increased in India. And there's a lot of other things that have happened. The new tariff regime obviously really forced a very fragmented cable landscape to migrate to a prepaid model. And then also mandate them to report individual subscriptions. So basically, the cable industry went through a lot of churn and basically lost a lot of subs. And DTH invested in strong back-end ecosystems, for the prepaid billing, and sort of benefited from that. By the time the markets adopted this new regime, cable lost, according to MPA India, around 15 million subscribers, while DTH grew. And there's been a lot of systematic rotational churn in the cable market that's still going on to today. Mir, do you want to add, sorry, just going back to the other slide, do you want to add anything on this part for the audience from a DTH perspective and also from a channel perspective, how it's impacted?
Sure. I think the key thing what NTO did from a distribution platform point of view is that it really was an acid test between cable and DTH as to how well both of these platforms have invested in their backend systems. DTH always was on a 100% prepaid model. They had invested in very strong, robust backend systems, which allowed consumers to kind of optimize their monthly bills. They can pick and choose their channels, much more seamlessly. Unlike in cable, which was, largely B2B driven, working on postpaid model, never invested in backend system. That's what kind of when things stabilize once the NTO was implemented. Cable saw a lot of rotational churn, which finally came to the fore, and we saw that churn happening. A lot of subscribers also moving from cable to DTH. So DTH, no doubt, especially the platforms which invested in the backend systems, gained significant subscribers last year.
Got it. Thanks, Mihir. Let's move on. So let's look at the DTH market. At the end last year, reported 56 million sort of active paying customers. And Mihir can discuss how he defines that, but they had active paying customers of 56 million at the end of last year. The big three are obviously Tata Sky, Airtel, and Dish, that account for almost 90% of the market. Dish has seen a bit of a decline in the subscriber base over the past 18 months. On high definition, which is still a reasonable sized market, around 13, 14 million customers. Tata Sky has 60% of the premium base. A lot of that's expected because a lot of their subs and audiences come from urban centers, unlike Airtel and Dish. Sun TV, or Sun Direct, I should say, Sun Direct, the DTH service, is primarily focused on catering to audiences in the south of India and operates at a fairly low ARPU of around $3. Now, as we see in the next chart that we have, DTH operators gained subscribers in 2019, very significant base. So as we entered this year, what's been the situation, right? Because historically, DTH has been kind of adding roughly, Mihir, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 to 4 million net adds in the recent years, like 1 or 2 years, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes. So 2020 has been a fairly mixed bag, to be fair. It's been impacted by the COVID situation. It's not like other satellite markets, which is contracted, that's for sure. That necessarily hasn't happened by the end of the year, because you can see by the end of the year, they're trending towards 58 million. But subscriber reactivations really surged, and reactivations really peaked during that lockdown period in India, the first big lockdown, I would say, in March and April, as consumers obviously were confined to home. However, we had a lot of stringent lockdown guidelines in India. And you have to remember, India right now is probably reporting the second or third largest cases of COVID instances in India. So there were no new subscriber installations. Acquiring subscribers in store has been very challenging. Then you've also had a lot of movement of migrants to hometown and the shutdown of a lot of commercial establishments, hotels. So that's led to a lot of high percentage of suspensions. And then we had a production shutdown, right? So the big broadcasters like Z, Star, Sony, Viacom 18, and various other players really weren't able to have fresh programming and fresh content. The only thing that was there, I guess, was news. So subscribers decided to downtrade to lower value packs, and that's basically what's happened. Now, production has come back from the Hindi entertainment side. More importantly, sports has come back with the IPL, right, being played out as we speak. And that's sort of going to boost the sector a little bit. And that's why we're seeing a little bit of a pickup, though we're somewhat conservative still at 57.8 million customers. So that's the story of 2020. Mihir, do you want to add something to this? Do you think with the IPL, with Diwali coming up, they could hit 60 million potentially?
Yeah, I mean, just to sum up what you said, in the first half, really, the industry was this, as you said, India had the strictest form of lockdown. So there was very restricted mobility to have any new installations. There was a production shutdown. So first half was more characterized by down trading, where there was a significant pressure on ARPUs and very limited subscriber additions. And the second half, suddenly with production coming back, live sports, which is typically skewed in the first half, has now come to second half of the calendar. So you not only see the industry benefiting from subscribers again moving up to premium tiers, but with freedom in movement, subscribers also opting for not just standard definition, but upgrading themselves to high definition. You'll see a decent uptake coming in the second half, and it kind of coincides with the festive season, so couldn't be much more opportune time for DTH to make a sharper recovery.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's move on. Now, this coming back to the NTO amendments, which I said have impacted niche channel economics, and of course, broadband connectivity also has played a part. This is a little bit more complex point. You obviously see these NTO and recommended amendments that came through in January of this year, and it's impacted the economics for niche channels. And as a result, the reach and viewership of niche channels, English movies, English entertainments, I get factual, lifestyle, kids, that's really been adversely impacted, and also been hit because the advertising market is also gone for a toss in post-COVID India. So the broadcasters have really been looking to recalibrate their channel portfolio, consolidate it, shut down some of them channels. And then secondly, a lot of that content, particularly English entertainment and movies, has frankly shifted online. We've just seen other niche channels, players also launching their own D2C products. Obviously, Discovery has launched the Discovery Plus, and they're creating a lot of original content for that. So this in turn is really affecting the premium tier offerings from a lot of the traditional pay TV operators, especially direct-to-home satellite. Mihir, do you want to add something to this?
No, absolutely. I mean, this particularly the DTH operators, which are more focused and having a sizable part of their subscription revenue coming from urban centers. This is a dent on their premium subscription tier, and it also necessitates for them to make a move towards having a hybrid offering, where most of these audiences are now migrating to.
Right. And there's a lot of channels that have shut down, including some important brands like AXN and some of the Sony brands. Now,
Actually,
as we move,
if I can interrupt just for a second and drill in a little deeper, because it's a question that occurred to me before. I was going to wait to the end, but we might as well pick it up now. And it really does have to do with the number of people who dropped their cable subscriptions when the NTO came into effect. You saw 15 million cable subscribers go down, 3 million DTH subscribers increase. It's still a delta of like 12 million people. Where did they go? Right? Is that all been shifting to online viewing? Is that where that's taken place? You talk about channels moving online. Has that consumption pattern moved to consuming online entertainment? Or are they just out of the game completely?
That's a good point. Where did those 12 million opt out? Have they gone to mobile? Have they gone to broad? I mean, are they consuming content online?
No, Chris, that's a good spot. So essentially, as I said earlier, cable was operating on a postpaid model or almost a fixed arrangement with different stakeholders. So MSO might have a fixed arrangement with the LCO. So they never really accounted for the churn basket. So overnight, when NTO was enforced and they had to move to a prepaid model, that entire churn bucket, which kind of was accumulated over the last 3-4 years since digitalization went underway, they had to address that. So you had kind of a lump sum churn of accumulated over the last 3 years, got accounted with them being forced to move to a prepaid model. Yep. Yes, of course, there are 2 to 3 million subscribers of this we believe would have moved to OTT, but they never were counted into cable's churn basket. So the regulation kind of forced them to move to prepaid, and they had to account for those churn numbers.
Got it. So it's as much as anything else. It's as much an accounting truing up of the books as it is.
Absolutely.
They didn't just disappear.
Those numbers were inflated and were corrected with one stroke.
Oh, very good. Okay. Sorry for the interruption, but thank you for the clarification.
No problem. So as we go to the next chart, I think, look, there's been a lot said about Jio and Airtel and the mobile broadband revolution that's happened in India, particularly in the last 36 months, and the cost of data coming down. So we won't repeat that here too much. But I think the big thing is really the household broadband universe, right? Because that is going to collide into what DTH does to some extent. Let's face it, DTH in India basically brought 21st century television, consumer service, packaging, all the great things that Indian consumers want. And they are still the proxy for that. And if anything's really going to challenge them long term, it's going to be the household broadband market. And over the last 24 months, we've seen the telco companies, particularly Jio, reinvigorate their investments to upgrade their networks. And they're now bringing in a new wave of price competition. Mihir can talk a little bit more about Jio Fiber, which has been principal in that. But Jio Fiber and Airtel have reduced their basic package pricing by 40%. So that brings it nearly at par to pay TV. And they're now offering unlimited data at higher speeds. So we're seeing a significant uptake potentially for the fixed broadband market. And the COVID factor will accelerate adoption. Jio's putting a lot of money into CapEx. They've also acquired 2 cable operators, Den and Hathaway, who also offered broadband. And so India's fixed broadband customer base is expected to grow from 19 million last year to 45 million by 2025. So that's going to be a fairly significant growth. And also the quality of fixed broadband infrastructure is going to improve. So more than 80% of fixed broadband subs will be catered via fiber. And that's a big growth and so forth. So why does it impact DTH? I guess, Mir, this is something important from your perspective to address. But right now, from what we've seen with Jio Fiber in particularly, they've done deals with the OTT players. So they have deals with Netflix, they have deals with Hotstar, Disney Plus Hotstar, I should say, with Z5, with all these players. But Mihir, are they going to be offering IPTV services? Are they going to be offering a package of channels as well and content?
So Jio for sure will be offering IPTV services, but not necessarily all Jio Fiber subscribers will opt for IPTV. Remember, they are primarily there in the data game, but there'll be certain subscribers they'll be taking away from the existing cable base. So they would want to offer IPTV as an option. I believe for whatever Jio would do in the next 4 to 5 years, close to 25 to 30% of their subscriber base might opt for also having IPTV services from them.
Got it. So look, I think from a consumer point of view on this chart, obviously the cost of bandwidth has become more affordable. CPEs and digital media consoles and hybrid boxes are more subsidized. Cost of content, particularly the broadcaster-backed OTT services, is actually free compared to what's available on linear pay TV platforms. So to some degree, the consumers in urban centers, the tier one markets, are almost re-engineering what they want on video. And the adoption of connected boxes is pretty important in that because boxes and dongles combined have surged, I think, around 2.5 times to reach 4 million at the end of last year. And we've seen that trend also in HD. So I think connected boxes could be where in 4 or 5 years' time, where HD is today, around 15 million deployed in a few years. Now, what has DTH done in response to this trend? Obviously, major DTH operators, both of them have introduced the connected TV sessions, connected TV solutions, I should say. Airtel has rebranded their offering. They've launched this hybrid box and dongle in September 2019. Tata Sky launched its Amazon Fire Stick in May 19, and then they got their launch of the hybrid box in Jan 2020. And both these players also offer a bundle of OTT services, including premium ones like Disney Plus, Hotstar, and Z5. So they both come into that. They also initially introduced sort of TV everywhere type services, as we see in the next chart, to really, to do what other operators the world over has done to protect their subs and to limit their churn. And then suddenly over the last 18 months, they've kind of pivoted slowly. I wouldn't say pivoted. Airtel has probably been more aggressive to some extent than most, but they've with telcos doing home broadband, and you've seen this Fire Stick from Amazon really been going up. You've seen Google Chromecast really going up. The notion of cord cutting has been a bit of a risk for DTH operators, but particularly because they're scared of losing premium customers. So, because, you got to remember, HD subscribers account for 50% of Tata Sky subscription revenues, and I believe more than a third of Airtel subscription revenues, respectively. So, DTH players have really introduced dongles bundled with select OTT services. And these dongles are sort of unmanaged solutions, which only offer limited control to the consumer, who of course wants to change his consumer habits every day. And so what they've done as a result, the DTH operators have obviously invested in what we call hybrid set-top boxes, which are increasingly popular globally. They're using that to mitigate churn, upsell new services, and hybrid TV is really, really becoming important for the DTH players. Mihir, I have one question for you on that, just as we look at that. How, as they launch these new boxes, are they subsidizing hybrid boxes, or are people buying it? Is it a premium solution?
Yes, initially these boxes came at a premium, but despite this year being hard on consumers, they have gone, given this year is hard on consumers, they've gone quite aggressive in terms of subsidizing it and driving penetration. It's
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, as we look at the what's happening with the linear channels, as we've said, tariff regulations with the NTO and the migration of linear channels to OTT is going to put pressure on linear TV ARPUs. So hybrid set-top boxes and the scale deployment of that is somewhat critical for DTH operators in the future to really improve their economics per subscriber. And beyond just introducing branded premium OTT subscription services, the connected box obviously offers some opportunities for subscriber monetization and new subscriber monetization, but particularly serving advertisers to reach premium audiences. And I think Airtel's been looking at that. Other avenues, including home cost, security, commerce, different types of revenue stream. MPA India has done some analysis of this in terms of the scaled hybrid box deployment. And generally, we believe that it might help DTH operators to expand ARPUs by 2 times, firstly, and gross profit margins to 45% from 30% currently. And the market potentially has a potential to get to 12 million hybrid TV connections in the next 5 years. as we move to looking at our overall market forecast of DTH, we think India's DTH customer base is still going to be very healthy. Decent, steady incremental increase to 65 million paying customers by 2025. So that's by far the largest opportunity in Asia. And ARPUs are going to remain under pressure. That's largely because consumers are shifting a share of how much they spend to online video. And therefore, coming back to the deployment of hybrid boxes is fairly critical for DTH to mitigate churn, but also retain premium and sustain, margin expansion. Now, execution is going to be somewhat challenging because DTH also will be facing, more and more competition from fiber operators, particularly in the key urban markets. But here we're looking at two scenarios essentially. Failed execution might keep the industry revenue stagnated, while hybrid set-top boxes could offer an opportunity to sort of win a share of the expanding online video market, but also explore new monetization opportunities. And DTH across that will have the potential to have around $3.6 billion in revenues by 2025. And as we've highlighted, the additional delta that is coming from hybrid boxes. So that essentially concludes our presentation. Chris, we'd love to engage in some Q&A with you on this. A little bit more about us at MPA here, but let's go ahead with the Q&A.
Sure, absolutely. Look, another point to make is that we can go back through some of the slides that you've presented here as we do the Q&A, but also we're going to be making the slides available to people who have logged into the webinar, so they'll be able to get those and refer to them on their own. So the theme that has come up, not quite in every slide, but certainly we walk away from your presentation with a very clear understanding that the new tariff order has been the biggest dynamic that has affected the market as a whole, and DTH, the DTH sector, significantly. How do you see that playing out? I mean, is all of the change done, or will there be more to come? Will there be more fiddling around on the administrative side?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question from a regulatory perspective. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, TRI has a new chairman, and I'm not sure where or what happens with the NTO. I mean, there's a lot of questions also about TRAI, whether they should regulate this sector, and they're effectively trying to erode the broadcasting sector. But I can't. Mihir, do you think what is the next iteration of TRI regulations, or do you think that's it? They're done from a price regulation perspective.
So the first set of regulations came into effect in Feb last year, and immediately I think it was 1st Jan 2020, and you had a new set of amendments coming from the regulator TRAI, and since then. The industry has come together to say, hey, I mean, we have just kind of come to terms to the first regulation, and we can't afford to have new amendments because we are losing subscribers. Channels are losing reach. In the last 18 months, close to about a dozen odd niche channels have shut shop or have gone online. So the broadcast fraternity has come together, and as we speak right now, the matter is sub judice. It's lying in High Court. From what we understand, we'll have to see what verdict the High Court has to say. But any new amendments, as suggested by the regulator, will come into effect not before this financial year.
So that is another theme that is a constant theme in India, is the regulatory interference in the marketplace, and the regulatory changes having a profound impact on day-to-day business. It's always hard to predict what will happen, and I know that there's a tremendous amount of crystal ball gazing and tea leaf reading when it comes to trying to figure out what's going to happen with TRAI and various government initiatives. When it comes to the satellite sector, I know that there have been a lot of changes that have been discussed. We're going to be looking at some of that going further down the road. But I think one of the big one of the big changes that we would like to see from the satellite industry perspective is a role for more foreign participation in the market. And that's something that previously has been really stifled. Certainly since the Modi government has been in power, there's been a strong buy local, Digital India has been a key theme, but it's been Digital India with Indian resources creating that. Is there a likelihood, or do you see, looking in the crystal ball, that there will be an opening to foreign participation, particularly when it comes to helping the industry grow and providing some of the capacity that's needed?
Look, I don't think there is. I think, to your point, broadly at a headline level, I think with the government there isn't necessarily an aversion to foreign participation or to international investment. I know there has been historically, and there's been a lot of issues about the open skies policy and so forth. But I think in India going forward, I think there is a role for foreign satellites to play. There is obviously sensitivity, as you know, with Chinese-backed vendors and companies being too involved in India for various reasons. Obviously, it's been there online, but it's largely been focused online. But it is also impacting the equipment side, particularly for telecoms and latently pay TV. But I think in terms of the international majors, whether they're from Europe and the US, there's always going to be an encouraging sign for them. And I think also the broadcast industry and the pay TV industry realizes they can't do this all by themselves. I mean, India's been trying to make, a lot of people have been trying to make India a home for set-top box, for example, production and gathering it, but it hasn't yet happened at scale. So I think they're going to need help. There's another question though, Chris, that you've said on that is, it's almost like the chicken and the egg, but it was almost like, I know we've had this discussion over the last few years about foreign satellites in India, but the other issue is demand and capacity demand.
Yeah. Well, that was where I was going next with this, but that's all right. Please jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to bring Mihir. I would love to get your take on this, but the way I look at it is, look, I think there is a lot of demand for more channels launching in India, because whatever we say about hybrid boxes, about HD, yes, very important, but the demand for just basic television,
True.
Okay, is going to be significant in India, number one. Number two, without the core television business, India's creative economy faces pretty dark times because online cannot shoulder the burden, right? Mihir, you know the numbers for online right now, but you have essentially 4 big players in India. I'll give you a headline note here, Chris. The largest player in India in terms of SVOD, in terms of getting people to pay for its content, is Disney Plus Hotstar, just in terms of the subscriber numbers, pure play. So I'm taking Amazon out of it, right? Because Amazon bundles with Amazon Prime.
Sure.
That company has in June reported 8 million customers, right? At 50, 60 cents, right? Per month. The largest DTH player, Mihir, correct me if I'm wrong, has close to 20 million customers at $3 to $4 a month. So you can see the delta, okay?
Yes.
And so it's a very different thing. So a lot of content creators still need the DTH industry to work at scale. And I think the launch of regional channels, the launch of vernacular channels are going to be very important. The problem for us is, and Mihir, correct me if I'm wrong, look, the broadband stuff is very real. Geo is also very real, but you've seen the disruption it's brought to mobile. So Geo's foray into home broadband has been delayed a bit because of certain infrastructure, because of COVID and so forth, but now it's coming across. So it is a threat, and it's no longer an existential threat. But the other big threat has been really the tri-regulations, which has basically forced a lot of channels to shut a shop, and also people like Star, NZ, and Sony, and others who were going to launch, 20, 30, 40 more new channels to consolidate their offerings.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 things that I see. I'm sorry if it's a very complicated answer, and apologies for going on about it.
No, it's not, but it does give us more to drill into. As you're absolutely right, I was looking at demand, because this is the belief that there's maybe not endless demand in India, but certainly a tremendous amount of untapped demand for content, and particularly, as you say, with vernacular content and regional content. The further out of the major metro areas that you get, the more people there are, and the more diverse those populations become. So it's sort of a channel operator's dream. We just need to change this or do this in another regional language, and it's
in a localized way. Yeah. Mihir, do you agree? Do you want to comment more on that?
Absolutely. I think also to Vivek's earlier slides, if you see, we still have 100 million homes which do not have television sets.
Yes.
They're yet to come into the pay TV ecosystem. And the other part is, the TV rating measurement system, BARC, what it has done over the last 2-3 years, it has expanded its coverage of people meters in rural markets. So if you see in the last 2 to 3 years, nearly 70% of new channel launches have been in regional space. So, as there is an increase in television penetration, as BARC expands its coverage of people meters, those channels get carried, our show measurement and and can monetize on advertisement. You'll see new channels coming in. But then the next wave of channels will come in regional languages, in sub-segmentation of new genres in various regional states. I think that's where we see a lot of demand coming in.
Mm-hmm. And this goes hand in hand. I mean, you've given me even more to go herring off in chase of. But the other one, the point that ties into that you've also referred to, Vivek, is the infrastructure issue. And that's where DTH seems to have, or would seem to have, a tremendous advantage. I guess what goes hand in hand with that is the cost of the CPE, the customer premises equipment, whether it's a set-top box and a dish or whatever it happens to be. That's a sort of an inhibitor. But still, the fact that the infrastructure requirement is limited to that, and all of a sudden you're part of the ecosystem. That seems to be a tremendous advantage for DTH and an opportunity for the market.
No, I agree. And India is the last bastion for volume CPE manufacturers, set-top box manufacturers, to your point, Chris. So at scale, because they have so much volume, the CPE prices for the big television customers are really, really reduced and are coming down substantially every day. I think the main issue is hybrid boxes are a little bit expensive. They have to be subsidized, as Mihir agreed. But that, to your point, in terms of the width of the market, DTH has no problem in supplying and scaling that up. So I think that's they have a significant strength in that market.
So let's talk a little bit more about the other factors that are interesting and important, I think, in terms of the overall health of the market. India is also one of the regional markets where the advertising segment has been so critical in the revenues of the whole thing. It's such a strong advertising market, and it has been since the outset. And yet you say also, you're pointing out that in the course of the last few months, particularly since the pandemic, that's taken a hit. Is that also part of the NTO? How does that work together, and what's the dynamic?
Yeah, it's just like a perfect storm of terribleness that's come through, particularly in the first half of the year. Mihir will give us an update, but I think there have been some encouraging shoots of growth, to be honest with you, after June. So definitely advertising was off a cliff. And when I mean off a cliff, I'm talking about 20, 30, 40% up, down year on year for most players. Mihir has the market, I think, contracting by 20% this year for television. And for markets to revert to, say, 2019 levels, I don't know. I think it's going to take them at least probably 24 to 36 months. But at least India will come back. There's a lot of markets where TV advertising won't come back. However, June and July, I wouldn't say stabilized, but it's been slightly better, softer. The IPL, interestingly, will probably do better than next year. And that's because of pent-up demand locally, which is very encouraging to see. So India is bouncing back because there is underlying macro strength. I know there's a lot of issues with the macroeconomically, that we talk about, but there is some underlying strength that is pushing the ad market in over the last 2 months and going forward over the last 2 to 3 months. Mir, do you want to comment more on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think what it does is, you have IPL coming in. I think people had questions about IPL coming this year, or in what form, whether it'll be a truncated event. IPL is there in a full-fledged form. It's happening during prime time, although it's happening in Dubai, prime time in India. And it's come at a time where the economy is just open up, coming out of the lockdowns, and it also ties in with the festive season. So, and you also have advertisers on a calendar year basis, which will look to exhaust their budgets. So when IPL comes in, a lot of other genres also see an uptick in advertisement, because advertisers just open up their purse to different genres also. So yeah, we'll see, we could be positively surprised compared to what we were anticipating on the TV ad side. We were anticipating anywhere between 25-30% decline in TV ad market this year. Maybe, we could still see on a base case a 25% decline, but we'll see a sharper bounce back in the next financial year.
Yeah, I mean that you can never downplay the importance of the Diwali season in terms of affecting everything, really, in terms of viewership and advertising and the whole gamut.
Correct.
Look, we're not exactly running out of time, but we're kind of winding down here. There's one more topic that I really wanted to touch on, and you brought it up. It's the geo factor, and the game changer that geo has provided to the industry as a whole. As you point out, the home broadband rollout has been a little bit slower than anticipated, although it's definitely been happening and looks like we'll be picking up speed again. But it still doesn't affect our rural areas. So when we look at the urban-rural split, that's not really going to, or is it? Maybe that rather than making a statement, I'll make it a question. To what extent is that also going to have an effect in the rural area? Which again, I come back to as one of the key prime markets for DTH, it feels like.
Yeah. Mihir, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, see, if you look at it, where geo really becomes a threat is not really more from a subscriber standpoint. You're spot on. Geo will look at addressing subscribers in urban centers, people who can pay anywhere between $5 to $10 or $15. But it's more of a threat for DTH, especially the ones which have had a significant number of subscription revenue coming from urban centers. As Vivek mentioned, close to about 50% of revenues for Tata Sky would come from HD subscriptions. They have somewhere around 7 million subscribers, and about 1/3 of revenue for Airtel comes from HD subscriptions. So it's really about not losing out those subscribers to Jio. So even if 25, 30, 40% of those subscribers move to Jio, that's a significant impact on the EBITDA. That necessitates two things for DTH operators. One is to really go aggressive, to invest in hybrid boxes to protect those subscribers. And secondly, how do we offset that by growing the larger rural market? So that's how I believe the DTH operators will really looking at tackling the new competition.
So it's an obvious sort of pivot to not necessarily a pivot. It's more of an expansion, doubling down on the rural market more than anything else.
Yeah. And we are, I mean, just to add, we are seeing this because, I mean, to one of the old slides which Vivek showed, DTH operators were earlier more reactive. I mean, they introduced their TV everywhere services because there was proliferation of OTT. Then they introduced dongles because suddenly you had a lot of digital media consoles like Chromecast and Fire Stick. Now they have realized, we have to be much more offensive. They have introduced hybrid boxes where they have a better control of the consumer's viewing habits. So they know what we really need to upsell to consumers, in terms of which OTT services. How can we, once we know more about consumers, once we create those data lakes, we'll be able to, monetize those consumers in future through different new avenues. It could be home security, it could be Internet of Things. But for that, they need a scaled deployment of hybrid boxes.
Sure. Look, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a very information-packed bit of time here. Really appreciate you sharing all of that data with us and the insights that go along with it. I guess in closing, it feels to me like it's complicated, but strongly positive. If I were to sum up the whole sort of prospects for the India DTH market and really kind of get back to the promise of the future of DTH in India, that's what I would say, complicated but positive. How would you summarize briefly looking forward?
Look, I think it is. It's as you said. It is complicated but positive. I still think there's regulatory risk. It has to be said in that market, given what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly for broadcasting, less so for online. And I think there is this latent competitive threat on fixed broadband, which the DTH operators are addressing. I think the one thing we didn't discuss is also as Jio expands. Jio is very catched up right now, clearly with all its investments. And, who knows? They might disrupt with 5G earlier than we expected. 5G is supposed to be 2 or 3 years. But if you've seen Jio's history, they always bring things forward by 24 to 36 months. And
well, after making people wait for how many years were we waiting for Jio's launch in the first place? 5-6 years, and then all of a sudden.
So I mean, the one question is, maybe after I finish, you can address this, is because people always ask me this in other developing markets, and it's an interesting point. Will 5G, if Jio scales that, say 22, 23, will that impact DTH? Will that be something for rural areas? I'm not sure. And is it more of an enterprise thing than a residential thing? But I agree with your premise, Chris, in conclusion.
Complicated but positive.
Yeah.
Me, sorry.
No, exactly. I think you're right, Vivek. So, we could see 5G coming in India much earlier than, most of the Asian markets where it's anticipated to come. And I believe 5G is also more of an enterprise play for Jio.
Right.
So, that's where, it might not necessarily put a dent as much as people are anticipating for DTH. For DTH, I think there's only one word. It's more about execution at this point. I think they've got the act right with respect to rolling out hybrid boxes, really going out there, seeding boxes, driving penetration. And if they do that, I think they've got it covered.
Yeah, thank you. And last word on that is, I think hybrid TV boxes is very important, but I also think very critical, and I think both Tata Sky and Sun and Dish are looking to address that, is what happens in the next 100 to 150 million households? How can you address that area, rural areas, people who don't have a television set, and get them into that equation?
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for the information. Mihir Shah in Mumbai, Vivek Kuto in Singapore, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.